Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work at Milton Academy, an independent boarding and day school outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy has a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and a master's degree from North Carolina State University. She works in private practice in Raleigh as a mental health therapist. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, part 2 of the article Julie and I started discussing last week from CollegeVine. They're looking at deferrals and waitlists and how to write a letter of continued interest. You're going to want to tune in for that. And Lisa and I will discuss a question that came in from a mom from California, which is a really good question. Which schools are overlaps and competitors for each other? So we're going to take that question on. And we have a brand new interview I'm really excited about. It's our first mom and son interview. It's Dan and Mary LaChance from the great state of Connecticut. And they're going to be sharing with us the incredible opportunity that exists right now for students in the field of cybersecurity. And January is here, so that means college spotlights are back. And Lisa and Linda will be discussing another underrated gem, Illinois Tech. Friends, hopefully you enjoyed the first part of Julie and I discussing letters of continued interest. Now you'll hear part 2. Now, one thing it does say in here that I thought I do like, it says, when you're considering what you want to update the admissions committee on, try to pick things that relate to your overall application theme. I actually like that. It says if you wrote about your interest in politics in your essays, tell them how you recently won a Model UN competition. As a result, you got to visit the UN headquarters in New York, where you envision yourself as a diplomat. I think that's important. It's the whole idea of, your compelling narrative or reducing your whole application to one sentence, like staying on message. Like if you've been Mr. Robotics all over the time, and now you come back and you're talking a lot about like creative writing, I just think it just can add a bit of confusion. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Julia?
Totally agree. And I would also say, too, it doesn't need to be. And actually, I've gotten that feedback from a college before where I had a student try to sort of introduce sort of something new. And then the college actually told us, like, it just seemed like this student was trying to grasp at anything. And then we couldn't really figure out exactly what the impact would be. So I totally agree with you on that, Mark. The other thing I find, if maybe you don't have an award or some sort of accolade or something tangible to show for your progress and one of your interests. But one of my favorite things that my students do is, let's say they've applied for engineering, they'll usually share about like a unit or an experiment they did in one of their lab-based science classes and how it sort of reaffirmed what they like about the process of designing something and puzzling through a challenge. Or I had a student, if they apply for English, about their favorite book that they just read in class and what they got out of it. Or even at Milton, we have a very hefty sort of term paper requirement in our year-long social science classes. And they'll go on to say like what the research process was like and how it really exposed them to new ideas and thinking about historical trends in a different way. So you don't have to have like won an award or something like that in your area of interest, but being able to further expand on how your brain thinks and where your passion is as well is really helpful here.
No, I really liked all of those examples. That was good stuff. So this is not in the article, but I want to ask you this question. What advice do you give to your students? Let me see if we line up here as to when to send the letter. And I'm not talking about something I worked with earlier today with a student, which was, you probably have some of these, Julie. You know how Chicago defers their EAs and they give you an opportunity to flip to ED2? That's different because that's a really short timeline. I'm helping a few people with those, actually. I remember somebody asked a while ago, how does Chicago have such a high yield? How do they do it?
Yep.
Well, they do a lot of flipping of early action to ED2. That's how they do it.
Yep.
Anyway, we're working on that. But I'm not talking about flipping to ED2. If you have a student that, let's say it's got a school with one round of early action, like the Northwesterns and the Dukes and the Ivies, those kinds of schools, right? When do you tell them they should send their LLCI?
Great question. And I'm glad you brought this up because I actually find that instinctively, a lot of students feel like, oh, I just got deferred. I want to do something about it right now. And they want to fire off a letter right away. Don't do that. I actually, I think so. If you are you got notified in the month of December, I usually have students send or upload their deferral letter in their portal by mid-February. And honestly, sometimes I've seen it be totally fine in late February. What I can tell on this side of the desk, and also it was true when I was on the other side of the desk, is that essentially if you're a deferred student, you get re-reviewed your whole application with the regular decision pool, but that's usually right before the college goes to committee. So they've read their applications. They're now going to go discuss most of their applications. At that point, the admission officer is now going to read any new information that is now in your file. So most admission officers, I think, are mostly rereading your file closer to those committee dates, which tend to be the month of March. So I like to give it as much time as possible. So your information is fresh, and also your letter is fresh, right? That's going to go right. It's going to feel very timely. Your admission officer is reading it right before they re-review you to consider you. So I like to say I have some students that do it in late January. But if you think about it, it's been maybe less than 2 months since you've applied. So I like to say, around early to mid-February to send that letter of continued interest.
Yeah, I knew. I knew we agreed on that. So there's many reasons why I stop my students when they want to do what you said, because that's how most of them do. So most of them act like they think speed is actually going to help them.
Right.
Know. But there's several reasons why I don't like that. One is what Julia said. For one, you don't have any updates. You might have some more meaningful updates if you give it a little bit more time.
Yes.
Two, it's closer to when it would be looked at anyway. But another thing to me that's important is I think that a lot of times people want to do it because it's sort of like the reflexive thing to a bruised ego. And it seems more reflective if, I'll put myself on the admission side. If I have someone that, let's say 2 months after this happened, is still reaffirming that I want to come to your school, well, I know several things by now. I know that they didn't commit ED2 somewhere. They're not in some ED2 pool or that, Julie and I see this a lot. I had a student a few years ago who never got into a school where their parent was an alumni interviewer. Okay. And this student was like, screw them. I'm not even applying. I'm done with them. If they don't want me, then I don't want them. And they did end up getting in schools equally as selective. So the point is, when you reaffirm your interest a little bit later, I have a better chance of thinking that you're going to be yieldable.
Right.
And that it's genuine. But when you just do it right away, you're mostly probably responding to the moment.
Yes.
Friends, I mentioned sampling briefly, but while editing, I felt compelled to emphasize it a little more. Yield is so important in admissions, and most schools that have early decision 2 or ED2 let students know by February 15th if they are admitted. So if you submit your LOCI in mid-February, but after 2/15 notification date, it not only will be well before the private colleges need to know this, but you also have the added advantage of the college knowing that you didn't apply ED2 somewhere and got admitted and you're not available. A sizable number of students who apply ED1 take their shot at ED2. And it's not unusual for a student to submit an LOCI and then apply ED2 elsewhere and get admitted. So the college doesn't necessarily know that just because you submit it, an LOCI, that you are yieldable or even free to even be recruited. But if you submit this after ED2 decisions are released, the added benefit is the school knowing that you are not committed elsewhere to another school. Now, it's very important that you look at deadlines. For public schools that offer early action, sometimes they'll give you a deadline for their deferral response or the LOCI in January. So this is where public and private colleges can sometimes vary. In fact, I was working with a student 2 weeks ago on their Florida State deferral response, and Florida State has a deadline of January 10th. So pay attention to explicit deadlines that colleges share with you in their correspondence communication or in their portals. So I would think that's important too, you know? Mm-hmm. Now, from your experience, Julia, when something's re-reviewed, do you feel it's re-reviewed from scratch, or do you think they're looking at the ratings like 4, 4, 3? They kind of have a tier, maybe look at the stuff they reaffirmed, and mostly going back to someone that meets an institutional need that the school might have and more reading that closer to that pool?
Great question. I think it is the latter. I think it is. I think it's not a full reread. I think it's relooking at sort of the ratings. A lot of colleges also, when they read an application, provide some kind of narrative or prose about this is what I read in the essays. This teachers say this about the student. So maybe reading those, but not the essays from top to bottom or the recs from top to bottom. And I would hope that also that any new pieces of information in the application does get a full read.
Yeah, it's really important. I said this to a family this week that's deferred at one of those super selective schools. And then I was meeting with the student and the mom, and then the mom said, in a very respectful way, she said, well, it says right here it will be reviewed. And then I had to sort of say, well, there's different levels of review. Yeah. It's not incorrect that it's reviewed, but there's not 3 readers rereading every essay and starting from scratch and reassigning new ratings, Right. They're picking up. Julia's so right. And I never mentioned that. A lot of times there's like a paragraph or just an overall, fit on a short. I mean, this is short. It's not a full page. Just overall succinct description of a kid, that with ratings, new updates. It is important to remember that different schools do things differently. It's certainly possible that some schools go back from scratch and read everything with fresh eyes. I'm not aware of any. I know that most schools just do not have the time to approach things this way. One thing we should say, you can do all of this stuff perfectly and not get in. In fact, at the most selective schools, it's usually what happens, because think about it. I know some of what we're talking about is deferral, and sometimes we can conflate deferral and waitlist. They are a little different, and they're similar, right? It's the same kind of process, usually meaning you were acceptable but not strong enough to get one of the original spots. And so in a certain extent, you're like an insurance policy. But the difference is with the wait list, there's not another round coming in. So with the deferral process, a lot of it can be, well, I kind of want to see how you compare to the regular round.
Yep.
That's a big part of it, And then when schools go back and then they look at, every school has a view in their mind of what a balanced class is. And when they go back and if they feel, oh, we were a little soft in this area, then they'll go back and say, okay, who was admissible, which would be like the wait list at, kids. And I always have to be careful when I talk about this, because sometimes my mind conflates waitlisted deferral, and then I have to catch myself. It's so easy to think of them because they're both sort of like insurance policies, right? But acceptable kids, they weren't the strongest assurance policies. But once again, with the wait list, there is no another round coming. All right. So then the article closes out with a letter. Well, actually, before it does that, it says, I want to know your thoughts on this. Infuse your personality into letter, whether that be through humor, personal stories, show qualities that like perseverance and curiosity. Any thoughts on that, Julia?
I would say just like when you're doing the original application, you should really be yourself. If you're not comfortable or didn't write in a quirky, funny way to begin with, this is not your time to try that. I actually do see this happen. My students feel like this is my last chance to stand out, and they end up doing something pretty different in terms of a writing style and format. And actually every time, I can't think of one other time, it is so far in the wrong direction that I am like, if you submit this, we have lost all hope here. I had a student write a love letter as a defer, and while I thought that was kind of cute when they explained it, it was wildly inappropriate at the end. And so I would say just be your authentic self, but if you're treating this as in the spirit of how you originally applied, and also as another opportunity to say more and add more to your app, stay in that range of authenticity, and in the same spirit of the supplements, be showing the college something that shows your fit, and shows what your characteristics are that you hope to bring.
And that's exactly what I had hoped you were going to say. It just rubbed me a little wrong when it said infuse your personality through humor, because I've seen students sort of feel like they need to do something different. And my immediate thought was, okay, I don't know. I just pictured somebody trying to become stand-up comic with a one-liner.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. It does go off the rails more often than not in defers. I have seen defer letters, these LOCI letters, than any other thing.
Yeah. So then it closes with an example, and I want to just read it because I think there are a lot of really good things in here. So, and it says, when it says CMD, that's their term for college of my dreams.
Yeah.
So dear CMD, all right. I would like to sincerely thank the CMD admissions committee for taking the time to look through my application amongst thousands of applicants and offering me an opportunity to join the waitlist. CMD is my dream school, and if accepted off the waitlist, I would happily attend. I would like to take this opportunity to display my continued interest in CMD and update the admissions committee on my accomplishments. And then it goes on to list a whole bunch of these accomplishments. I thought Julie and I both thought it was a little long. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to read about the guy scoring 34 points in the game and all this stuff that it said. It was like 3 paragraphs. So I won't read it. It's pretty lengthy, and we kind of think it should be shorter. But then it says, CMD has distinguished itself as a top institution for me. I'm continuously in awe as I read about the amazing work in helping students achieve their dreams. I would like to thank the office once again for reviewing my application, and I would eagerly matriculate if offered a position in the class. Thoughts, Julia?
Yes, I actually thought you agreed on all parts as you did, but this is exactly what I see as a good defer letter, is that I got a sense from this example about what a student had been up to, but also why it was important to them. And then it was easy for me to figure out how they might be able to contribute to campus through those activities and interests. And then the sort of really lovely piece about these very specific pieces about the college that speak to them. I also do co-sign on the idea of ending your letter with like, I if accepted, I would attend. And I would hope that, and I have gotten this feedback from colleges, I would hope you would only write that if that's really the case. Mm-hmm. And if you're not sure, there's other ways to express your interest without essentially having to hyper or, sort of embellish or, so sometimes for my students who feel they need to send a defer letter, but it's not their first choice, but they want to make sure they stay competitive. They say like, I remain this school, or you remain one of my top colleges. And maybe that's a little risky because then there's other stuff there, obviously. But I've had colleges tell me, please don't have your students say you're my first choice in this unless we really are their first choice. If I don't want my student sending to 3 colleges deferred letters saying you're my first choice, and I would definitely attend. So I do think you need to be authentic, but I definitely co-sign on the idea of ending the letter with a very nice commitment to the college if that's authentic to you.
I agree 100% with everything you said. So I thought that the letter struck a really good, upbeat, appreciative tone, and it started out really nicely positive. And I agree 100% with Julia. I like the idea of saying twice, reaffirming your commitment to enroll if you will, in fact, make that commitment, but you cannot make that commitment unless you're genuine. It's it's funny, Julia, the things that we remember. So I am still upset. I have to tell a story here. This is like 2006. And so I'm doing boarding school admissions. And with boarding school admissions, you work with a placement director that's just exactly like what Julia does. And they're working with their class, especially if they're coming from a private school. So there's a student, and she was on my caseload. And she was not an easy admit. Like it was one of those ones we debated for a long time at committee. And we even had special committee where, you have special committee, you have like experts come in and all this stuff. And speak to their area. Someone look at the writing. Someone spoke on this, that, the other. It was a long time that we deliberated. I was in there pushing for her. And one of the reasons I was pushing for her was she had clearly affirmed, this is my dream school. I want to come so badly. So to make a long story short, she doesn't come. So I'm following up with the placement person, which is like the college counselor at the school. And I was like, I won't say his name, but I was like, I have to admit, I'm a little salty because I really expended political capital. So Julia knows this. You can expend political capital at committee because you can't go fight for every kid. Then you're like the person crying wolf.
Yep.
Right? So you have to pick and choose your battles. So I expended a lot of political capital fighting for her, and then she doesn't come. And then the placement director said, I found out she did that to 4 different schools.
Yep.
I was hot, and I'm still hot.
Yes. Oh, I still remember mine. Also a girl from the South. Also a college counselor that told me definitely will come. And then, no, they went to Pomona. So
see, we still carry these wounds with us.
Absolutely. And it made and honestly too, and you can lose some of that political clout that you had where, Haverford was such a small school that we really, one student is too many, right? So being able to really fight for this student and whatnot. And that was my one I could really get through. And then bloop. So do you think people wanted to listen to me and my favorite students off of the waitlist or defers the year after? No.
And the other thing I'll say too is you can lose credibility as a counselor if you're affirming this
100%
and people don't come, or if you're signing ED commitments and then people back out.
Ooh, yes.
Because now it's I can't trust you.
Right.
And then trust is everything, right? It's all about trust. And so now I can't trust you. So just a few more tips. But I thought this was a really good article. I thought we had a really good, robust conversation. I kind of feel like we covered all the main points. Is there anything you didn't feel we covered, Julia? I'm not thinking of anything.
I would just like to put a plug in for following the college's specific instructions about an LOCI.
I'm so glad you told me that.
And shout out to some colleges who are much more clear than others. So some schools will actually go right to waitlist rather than defer, and they'll even have a waitlist form that you fill out. So please follow those instructions. And sometimes those actually, I find the waitlist forms have far more ideas about them than a LOCI, for example, from a defer for an early. So they might, Michigan, for example, says on this date, please provide just one paragraph that says these things if you're interested in staying on the waitlist. But some schools like Yale in particular last year actually wrote to its deferred early action applicants, please don't send anything more. We do not need it. But they said, it's not encouraged. And guess what? All of my students did it because even though it said it's not encouraged, what if one student did it and then the other ones didn't? And then they would look like they're not as interested as the other students. So I do believe it. When a college says it's not encouraged, I really do believe that, and that they wouldn't like that. They don't have a lot of time to read more information. So if they're saying they don't encourage it, they really do mean that. But especially if the college is very clear, please do not send us more materials, or including a letter of continued interest. Please pay attention to that, because you're kind of taking up space and not following instructions, and that's not going to endear you in the regular decision pool if you're deferred.
Julia, I am so glad you brought that up. This is an extremely important point that the article didn't mention explicitly, and I was thinking about it when I was prepping for this, and then I forgot. This is the first thing I do every single time when someone says that they're deferred. I'm like, let's look at the exact language. And so I had 2 cases this week, and I was working with the family, and I know you get this a lot, Julie, because I always get it. One of the people's go-to things is to try to get a letter from somebody.
Yes.
People want to go get a letter. And a lot of times schools do not want that. The overwhelming majority of the times, in fact, certainly there are exceptions, but most of the time they do not want additional letters of rec coming in.
They don't.
And so you have to follow those instructions. So I was going through it, and it was giving very explicit instructions about what was acceptable and what wasn't, and even before today, Julie and I were texting, and I was saying, if maybe it was last night, I can't remember if it was today or yesterday. My days are morphing together, Julia.
Makes sense. Yeah.
But I was saying, if I was in admissions, I would be even more aggressive. I really would, because I see everybody just takes that little sliver and they want to do more. They do it all the time.
Yeah.
And so, was it Michigan a few years ago? I think now the school's starting to get confused in my mind. That sort of indicated, like, if you don't follow our instructions, it will be worse for you or harder. Yeah. Was it Michigan? I think it was that.
Carnegie Mellon has gotten, they've been fun with their waitlist forms, but I think they're getting closer to being ethical and clear. And they have basically started to spell out for students, you just do this very thing and do not do more. It won't work out.
Yeah, I really would, because my experience is people just want to, just take that inch and go for it. And
yes.
And I get it. A lot of times people are successful, they're highly accomplished, they're used to getting their way, maybe running businesses, whatever. And it just feels passive to not, and also they're feeling like other people are going to be doing it. So I have to get the edge.
Exactly.
I have to get the edge. That's the mindset. And, I try to tell people, like, part of it is a test of, can you follow instructions?
Right.
So that's extremely important. And then I was working with another student on a deferral. This one was yesterday, and we were pulling it up and reading it. And it said right in there, no letters of recommendations.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, I've learned this the hard way, Julia, to not rely on my institutional history knowledge of a school, because it could change on me from year to year.
It does. It really does. Yeah.
So that's my first thing, even for myself. Like, before I say anything, I'm like, let me look at the exact wording. And I almost have like my magnifying glass out there, because I know every word was carefully crafted and chosen.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for that. We almost forgot a big one. I would have been like, Julia, we need to go record and insert and add it to the end. Thank you.
Of course.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Lisa, another fantastic question from a parent from California about trying to determine who's a competitor, particularly for scholarships and other things. So we'll let you listen to the question, and then we'll talk.
Hi, I'm a parent calling from California. Thank you for your wonderful podcast. I listen to every episode and often recommend it to others. My question is about competing colleges. I am wondering how to determine which colleges are competitors of other colleges in regards to college admissions. One reason would be when asking for more financial aid. Maybe school A is our desired school, but we got a better package offer from school C. However, school A is not a competitor of school C's. Is there a formula to be able to help us evaluate which schools are in competition with others? Or is it similar or same admitted student stats? Just wondering if you can help shed some light on how we determine this. Thanks so much. Bye.
All right. So how do you do this, Lisa, when you're trying to determine who a competitor is?
Well, I think for me, sometimes after you've been doing this for a while, you just sort of know, which is not
That's
a very
true.
helpful answer to our parent from California. But
I know.
one thing that I do look at is in the FISC guide and in Princeton Review, they do have overlaps. And those are schools that people commonly apply to at the same time. I've also
Can I stop for a sec? Those are very good, by the way.
Mhm.
So they literally have a section that says students that apply here also apply here. I find those are very, very good. The only thing with Fisk and Princeton Review is they each cover under 400 colleges.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah. Go ahead. You're on a roll.
I've also had pretty good luck with just asking the college who are
Yeah.
your competitors, who, whether that's them on a visit or, just in some email correspondence, and they'll tell you who their competitors are typically.
I've never had somebody not answer that
Yeah.
question for me. It is not considered inappropriate at all. A common term that's used in admissions is overlaps or cross apps. Those are both terms that are constantly used into who are your cross apps. It means when you cross, who do you overlap with? It's the same thing. Like and schools all know this data. They absolutely know who their competitors are. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. So those are like kind of the ways that I have done it in the past. Now, I mean, in terms of the question of how do you negotiate your merit aid offers, and I think she asked, like, well, if you pose like a challenge to a school and say, well, your competitor is giving my child this much off, that might be more effective than, she said, like, if you say to a school that is not a competitor, this school is giving me X amount off, and they might say, well, you should probably go there then if that's what you want to do, right? Because maybe they just don't feel like they need to compete for that student. So I'd be curious to know your thoughts about that.
Yeah, let me say something on that. So the parent is onto something with this, but there's a lot of nuance here. So we're talking about the fact, like, let's say you're applying to a school and their financial aid award they give you is $10,000 less than you feel you can afford, or let's say it's $10,000 less than another school offers your student. The first question you have to look at is, how does a school respond to reevaluating an aid offer? Because schools have completely different policies on this. So some schools just flat out say our offer is our final offer, period. Most schools will respond to an appeal if the appeal fits within their criteria of when they consider an appeal. So you have to look at several things here. Like, if a school gives a lot of need-based money, and if they meet full demonstrated need, which is a short list of schools, and once again, that's not you determining what your need is, it's them using their formulas, and they do the assessment of your income and assets using their formulas, those schools are usually very, very receptive to a needs-based appeal. And the easiest need-based appeals to win are a decrease in your income or a significant increase in what they would regard as legitimate non-discretionary expenses. So significant medical procedures, high dental costs, those would be significant expenses. Change in income, reduction in hours, job change, different job, anything to do with, the numbers that we saw were not accurate. And it can get really technical here. I once was working with a student at a selective private school that was very generous with their money. And unfortunately, the family went through a divorce in the time I was working with them. And they won a $9,000 appeal because of legal fees related to the divorce. But once again, this kind of goes back to a question you and I answered a while ago, Lisa. Only the schools that were flush in money could afford to even do something like that. So the reason I'm going into some detail on this is I don't want people to think that every school will respond to an appeal because another school awards you a different amount of money. I'll give you an example. One of the complicated things I get involved in when helping people go through an appeal is families that have a decrease in income from what's called the base year. Yeah. So FAFSA CSS profile, they use something called prior year, right? So we're in 2024 right now. And so if a student was applying starting in in the fall of 2024, they would use 2022 income. If someone's starting in the fall of 2025, they use 2023 income. Fall of 2026, 2024 income. Well, the problem is you're not living off of income back then. So what happens if the base year they're using is no longer valid because you've had a change in financial circumstances? I know this is getting into the nitty gritty, but this is one of my favorite questions to ask financial aid officers is how do you respond to a family that has had a decrease in income from the base year? So when I asked that to Davidson and Emory's director of financial aid, two schools that are some of the most generous out there, they're both no loan schools at all incomes. There's only 20 schools in the country like that. They both said that we don't honor that because, as Emory's director told me, nobody ever comes to us when we make more money.
Mm-hmm.
They only come when they make less. And we've run the numbers and we would need 4.7% more in our budget to award all these one-way requests. So it'll get worked out the next year because that will show up in the following year. So that's like the David. Let me say this because schools change their policies. These were both conversations that I had more than 2 years ago. So this is data like from 2019 to 2021.
Right.
So they both said it is what it is. Whereas like WashU, like they're very accommodating on that.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead.
Talking about merit aid awards.
No. She is the question is about merit aid. I was trying to give an example of how schools have very different policies.
Right.
And their policies are established a lot of times. Like, sure, there's an area that falls into professional judgment. There are some things in that murky middle where, they can make the individual call. But even on something like, okay, will we make an adjustment off of need-based aid if you have a drop in income? That's this thing that schools have established policies on. So that also applies to merit as well. So schools have a policy. Like if you look at Cornell, like they put it right on their website. If you get a better aid offer, and then it says from the following schools, but it's a very short list of schools. It's like other Ivies, places like Duke and Chicago and a couple others. So this is where she's getting at, which is if a school is open to doing a merit-based, not a need-based, a merit-based aid evaluation based on a competitor appeal, then they won't do it unless they really see a school as a peer institution. So I agree with that point, but I really wanted to emphasize a lot of schools don't do appeals based on competitor packages. They might say, hey, maybe for another student, we would have given them more. Like they might slightly do a different policy on how they look at home equity and that. So I don't want our listeners to think everybody does that. So that's why I wanted to go into some detail on that.
Yeah. I mean, and one of the things I thought that was sort of implied in this question was the idea of applying to a competitor school with the sole purpose of using that to get more money out of your preferred school. Is that an admissions policy or practice that you think people should do?
I wouldn't recommend doing that. I can understand why somebody would think that way. Because if you're thinking that I want to go to the best school at the best price, why not be strategic? But I think implied in that question is that schools will probably do a competitor appeal adjustment. And a whole lot of them will not.
Right.
A whole lot of them will have the mindset that maybe it worked out that school was higher for this kid, but for another student, we might have been higher. And so keep in mind, if schools are using the CSS profile to do an assessment of financial aid, there are over 300 factors that they can take into consideration. That's completely custom. That's not like what you get with the FAFSA, which is federal methodology and is formula driven. Schools can have completely different policies on all kinds of things that impact the net price calculator that you complete. So it's more the exception than the norm that automatically does a competitor appeal. So that's one reason why I wouldn't recommend that. And then, I don't know, it kind of can feel a little exploitive, to be honest. Like you're going to have somebody read an application, maybe recruit you, do all of this for no reason other than for you to squeeze another school out of more money. Like, I know I put it really crassly, but if you have no interest at all in the other competitors, I'm not really comfortable with it ethically. Now, I would say if you have some interest, if you think, well, if I like this school, then maybe I'll like these schools. Or a really good way to look at I like to look at overlaps as a good way to identify other schools you might like. So, one of the things, Lisa and I work together outside of, your college-bound kid working, with students in the college process. And so one thing that's extremely helpful to me and to you, if somebody visits a school and they love that school,
Right.
I
I'm
mean,
always
immediately,
thinking, oh, what other
yes,
schools do they like?
correct.
Yeah.
So that's how I encourage the use of overlaps.
Yeah. Because I think like when I look on parent boards, like things like that, there's a lot of talk about negotiating your merit aid offers.
Yeah.
I never had the guts to do anything like that. I'm a terrible negotiator. I'm just like, okay. And then,
Well, yeah, now I'm going to push back on you here, Lisa, because I don't have statistics on this, but it's close to 50-50 whether someone's successful appealing an aid award. If you have a good reason for an appeal,
right,
and you're reasonable, like if you come asking for 20,000 more, it's usually not going to work. However, there are a lot of schools that don't lead with their best offer. And when they admit you, they want you. And I know when I was in admissions, and this is back when tuition was like $45,000. So it's still a lot, but it doesn't compare to what some of these rates are now. It was kind of nothing for us to throw my boss used to call it, let's throw them a bone. And it was $5K was a bone. And we would do that a lot of times. If we wanted a kid and they appealed, the point I'm making is $5,000 and under is not a lot of money a lot of times for a school. Of course, this depends on the school, depends on the resources, depends on the cost of the school. You have to be so careful when we're talking because you don't cover all the nuance. What if it's a commuter student that's only cost is in-state tuition? $5,000 is a huge amount, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a residential private school that's pretty up there. So I always say that when they admit you, they want you. There's no harm in asking. There's a certain kind of way to ask. And I don't want to turn this whole question into how to appeal, which is kind of what I feel I'm doing. I absolutely like to believe in taking people through the appeals process. And half the time you win, half the time you don't. If you do it the right way and you're reasonable about it. So I'm pro appeal. I really am. Back to a couple more things on the competitor overlap schools. There's some other things to look at. Public will almost never compare to private to public. That's almost like apples and oranges. Just to make it really clear, one reason why if you're not deemed as an academically competitor, if they do appeals, they won't honor that, is their mindset will be, well, you were probably a really big catch for that school. We're more selective.
Right.
So it is true that when schools do competitor appeals, they are looking for similar levels of selectivity. And so two simple ways of looking at selectivity, and I know both of these metrics are flawed because they can both be exploited, but when you look at them in tandem, they really give you a pretty good gauge, and that's just acceptance rate and average test scores. When you look at the combination of acceptance rate and average test scores, you usually have a pretty good gauge of selectivity. And so if you're looking at that, then keep in mind size of a school. A school that's 20,000 is not going to overlap as much with a school that's 2,000 or 3,000. And then also, all of these things are all just points. They're not exclusive. And the next one I would say is geography. If sometimes when schools are similar, like for example, if you're in Pennsylvania, Franklin and Marshall, Dickinson and Gettysburg are going to have a ton of overlap. They're all small liberal arts and science schools, somewhat comparable in their selectivity, all around 2,000. They have tons and tons of overlap. And now F&M gives no merit money, so that's not a good example for this. But Dickinson does give merit money. Muhlenberg's another one that's kind of around that same size.
Mm-hmm.
Slightly less selective, but close enough so that, the conversation could probably happen. Whereas like Haverford and Swarthmore, no merit money, more selective. Just in Pennsylvania has tons and tons of these small little schools. Now, sometimes it's type of school too. So for example, the University of Rochester and Case Western Reserve, those are overlap schools. They're same athletic league, major R1 research institutions, strong medical programs, draw a lot of similar kids. Emory Wash U, similar, in so many ways, same athletic conference, lots of overlap, similar size, similar type of institution. Another common area besides size and location and athletic conference and selectivity, another place that you'll find overlaps to be common is religion. A few years ago, I worked with a student from just outside the Nashville area who was very involved in service, but not just any service through her denomination, which for her was ELCA, which is just an acronym for the Evangelical Lutheran College of America. So she was very interested in ELCA colleges. So some of the colleges, I gave her to research were Augustana, Carthage, Augsburg, Muhlenberg, Gustavus Adolphus, Gettysburg, Valpo, which is Valparaiso in Indiana. Now, all of these schools are either directly affiliated with ELCA or they have a loose affiliation. And while some of them are not far away geographically, you have quite a few in the upper Midwest. In Minnesota has a large Lutheran constituency there. Wisconsin, and in Illinois, you have Gettysburg and Muhlenberg in PA. And they all have a decent amount of overlaps with each other. And so this is true for other schools of religious affiliation. I'm just using ELCA as an example. Applies to Jesuit schools, Seventh-day Adventist schools, Muslim schools, just you name it. Religious affiliation is a common place to look for overlaps. So there's something to be said for things like size, location, not exclusively, because USC could have overlap with an East Coast school for someone doing a national search. But those are the kinds of things that you'll tend to find a lot of overlap, because a lot of our listeners will go all across the country for a school, but a lot of people still do stay within a certain geographic range. And having said that, WashU is not even close to Emory. So they're like, what are you talking about?
Oh, well. Didn't you mention the website College Simply as a good resource for this?
I'm so glad you shared that. College Simply is another great place to go for overlaps. You can just put a name of a school in College Simply and they'll kick out overlap. So that's a really good website for overlap. So I almost forgot that. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah. Hopefully this was helpful. I know we got into a lot of money stuff. And hopefully was this one too much in the weeds, Lisa? Give me the weed grade here on this one.
I think it got a little in the weeds, but I do think it had some very practical implications. So, and we weren't talking a lot about, a lot of complicated statistics that are difficult to understand, but just more how schools use their financial aid policies. So I think it's fine. I think it's good.
Okay. All right. If we get too weedy, you can be like my weedonometer, or whatever it is.
We have to think about that.
You have to think about what do I call it? Exactly. Yeah. Weedonometer is pretty weak.
You need a weed in the weeds alarm, So then
exactly.
Get back from the weeds, out of the weeds, everyone out of the weeds.
I can delete it I can leave it on the editing floor when I edit and cut it out. But hopefully this was helpful for everybody. Thank you guys. You guys are sending in amazing questions. In fact, so many amazing questions that you always know we're getting a lot of questions because we go to Monday, Thursday and do 2 questions a week. And so you guys have been shooting them in there for us. So we appreciate it. Thanks. All right, anonymous listener from California, be sure to text at 404-664-4340 or email at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com and let us know. Do you want Dr. Lewis Newman's book, Thinking Critically in College, The Essential Handbook for Student Success, which just came out in 2023? Or do you want Elliot Felix's book, How to Get the Most Out of College, 127 Ways to Make Connections, Make It Work for You, and Make a Difference? That came out in 2022. Happily to send it off to you, but we need to know who you are.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Hello, friends. This is a very important interview. I'm really, really excited about you're about to hear. For many reasons, I'm excited. First of all, we haven't had a student on in about a year and a half since Lisa interviewed one of her Wyoming students from Scholar Match. It's our first time ever having a mom and a son on together. But even more important than that, there's 3 other reasons I'm very excited about this interview you're about to hear with Dan and Mary LaChance. For one, cybersecurity jobs are booming, and our listeners need to know about the incredible opportunity that exists in that field. And they'll be discussing that. Secondly, I want you to see an example of a student who chose to block out all the noise and not rule out a school because it had a higher admit rate. And just listen to all the benefits he will receive because he didn't discriminate against the school because they admit more students than they deny. And I'm not talking about a 2.5 student with reduced college options, but a student close to the top of his class who broke out of the herd mentality that so often defines excellence by how many students did a school reject or deny, by how hard was the school to get admitted, and using that as the criteria of how excellent it is. Finally, I want you to see an example of a student who knew what he wanted, and instead of just looking at a school in its totality, things like overall rankings, test scores, admit rates, national prestige, instead he chose to focus on which colleges have the strongest programs in my area of interest. Dan and Mary will be with us for the next 4 weeks. For this Thursday and next Thursday, they will discuss the incredible opportunities that exist in cybersecurity careers. And for the following 2 weeks, they will both discuss Rochester Institute of Technology, or it is more frequently and affectionately referred to as RIT. In part 1, Dan talks about how he used summer programs to confirm his interest in cybersecurity. Dan shares all the branches or options you can select once you decide you want a career in cybersecurity. Mary's a data engineer who works with cyber insurance, and she shares the changes she has seen in the job market. Dan shares how he picked a college given his strong interest in cybersecurity. Mary and Dan talk about the compensation cybersecurity grads are getting right now, right out of college. Mary talks about the government grant opportunities that are available in cybersecurity. And finally, Dan talks about how co-op opportunities work at RIT, and he talks about the compensation for co-op jobs in the first and second year. Listen and enjoy. Friends, super excited. It's been 1.5 years since we bought you a student, and now we've got something better than a student and a parent. I am here with Dan and Mary LaChance from the great state of Connecticut. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves?
All right. So, hi, I'm Dan LaChance. I'm a first-year cybersecurity major at RIT, and I just recently went to college with the help of Mr. Stucker here.
And I'm Mary LaChance. I'm Dan's mom. I also work in insurance, and one of the products that our insurance company sells is cyber insurance. So I might have a little bit of a take coming from that angle. And I should say, all of these are my thoughts, not the company. So.
Yeah, and our long time listeners may remember Mary was the one who brought cookies to Dave when he was working in the state during COVID, and you felt bad, and she drove 1.5 hours to bring cookies. And I think Mary, I definitely know she's in the listening family. I really don't think she's ever missed an episode. Never missed an episode. So longtime member of our podcast listening family. And we are here to talk about cybersecurity because in talking with Mary and Dan, I've known cybersecurity is hot. I buy stocks there because I know it's hot. But Mary helped educate me. Dan helped educate me as to actually how hot it is. And we always have parents and students who are looking for where's a place where there's great ROI, great return on my investment in terms of job security, job growth, salary, all of that stuff. And so that's kind of what we want to talk about today. So, but before we get into that, Dan, why don't you talk a little bit about how you knew cybersecurity was for you? You might want to share some of the things you did in high school. Obviously, you have a mom who's kind of Mary is a researcher par excellence. So she is I'll tell you something else. Once I did a presentation for you guys on how to use LinkedIn to find out where people are getting jobs. That came from Mary. So we got a researcher who's on top of her game, and Dan who, let me just talk, Dan. Talk to us about your high school experience.
Okay, so during COVID, my mom was trying to get me to still stay busy with academic stuff. And especially over the summer, there wasn't really a whole lot to do. So she got me involved and signed up for a couple of summer programs. The first one was just like an online one at a local university, and I actually really enjoyed it. It was just basic like hacking skills, pretty interesting stuff. And then the following year, I went to 2 summer camps, one at Central Connecticut State University and then one at University of Maryland. And both of those were week-long programs, and there was a day on each topic of cybersecurity. So in cybersecurity, there's a whole bunch of branches, and we really just honed in on one certain branch, just like a surface level approach to it. And that broad overview of everything got me really interested in it, because I don't want to just be a programmer for the rest of my life. I want to be able to like share my people skills and that type of thing. But after I went to those 2 summer camps, then I started a Cyber Patriot, which is a national cybersecurity competition at my high school. And that club is actually still going on. And that helped me get some leadership skills. And from there, I knew that cybersecurity was what I wanted to do.
Great, great. So I'm going to start with you on this one, Dan, but Mary, you're really knowledgeable too. You can chime in and share anything that Dan doesn't share. So you mentioned there's several different strands, brands. I forget the term you used, but branches.
That's just the term that I use.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some of the different options? Let's say someone is like, this thing sounds kind of neat. Like, why don't you give an overview between the two of you of, what are some of the options within cybersecurity, if that's appealing to someone?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a bunch of different branches that you can do. Like, for example, you have defense, where you're basically just trying to protect from cyber threats and get systems back up and running after a cyber attack happens. There's offense, where you're like testing the security of a company ethically. You have like a permit to do so, and everything that you find, you share with the company to help them better their security. Then there's compliance, which this kind of goes hand in hand with law. You're trying to make sure that a lot of companies are compliant with the current laws and regulations. Like, for example, for the payment card industry, if you're handling like credit card information, that type of thing, like supermarkets and just general stores, there's a certain level of cyber defense that you need to have. And compliance makes sure that all of those companies are upholding that standard. Then there's threat intelligence, where you're going in and you're like checking like current cyber trends, and you're monitoring, analyzing, and discovering new cyber threats as they come out. So you're taking, like, say, some malware is found on a computer, you're taking that, reverse engineering it, and finding out what it actually does. Then there's development, which you automate security through software. That's pretty basic. It's just like you're coding things like Microsoft Defender, that type of stuff. Then administration. There's also administration. That's like your basic IT services. So you manage the systems and the infrastructure and just make sure that there's no leaks in there. And if something does happen, that an attacker can't elevate their privilege and spread through the network. And finally, there's business. So those are like CISOs and CISOs, so chief security officers and chief information security officers. So they're the people at a company that are really pushing for different levels of cybersecurity within the company. And I know that Travelers, the company that my mom works at, has a really good one.
You're good, dude. I mean, I never told him I was going to ask him that question, and he just went off. That was impressive. So, Mary, you're also kind of involved in this from a professional standpoint. Is there anything that you want to add either to what Dan said or trends, things you're observing when it comes to, cybersecurity, maybe that might be different now than 5-10 years ago?
Yeah, like I work in my job, I do data. So I'm a data engineer. I manage people that are trying to make sure that we're moving data correctly, that everything is secure, and we support the cyber insurance product. one thing that I will say, where you were talking about how is cyber, the job outlook on that. When I think about where data science was 10 years ago, that's about where cybersecurity is now. You don't see a lot of undergraduate degrees for it, but you see some master's degrees for it. So a lot of students who are coming out of college right now don't necessarily have a degree in cybersecurity. They might have a degree in computer science or computer engineering or management information systems. And there are only a few colleges, and I'm sure Dan could rattle off some of those, that have it as a major. As far as like growth within cybersecurity, I can tell you several years ago when our company was really first starting to get into cyber insurance, it was sell it all, sell anything that you can, because there really weren't that many attacks. Now there are a whole lot of attacks. Something about 75% of companies get hit each year. So the need for people who understand cybersecurity and can help do the defense and offense and all those things is super important. And I feel like we aren't getting enough people going into it. And you can go across every industry, you can governments. You've heard about all the cyber breaches that have been out there, maybe personally from your own information getting hacked. But you also have heard about, like, out in Las Vegas, MGM and Caesars were both hit recently.
I heard about that. Yeah.
Hundreds of millions of dollars that it costs those companies. So you can only imagine if you are a company that gets hit for millions of dollars, you'd be willing to hire some people who actually know how to defend against that.
No, it makes a lot of sense.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, for our recommended resource for episode 393, I don't want you to miss a resource that Mary referred to, and it's the website gen-cyber.com. Now, this place is a treasure trove to provide resources that deal with cybersecurity experiences for both students and teachers at the high school level. And the great thing about this, and I love programs that are really committed to providing access. And I'm referring to GenCyber, they're striving to be part of the solution to address the nation's shortfall in skilled cybersecurity professionals. And they do not want finances to be an obstacle as they attempt to level the playing field. So their programs are financially supported by the National Security Agency and the National Science Foundation, as well as other partners. And most of their programs are actually free. And so you can go on and you can read about their camps. I mean, they have camps in every state. So if this is an area of interest, you remember it was camps that Dan used to confirm his interest in cybersecurity. But one thing I encourage you to do is go on to gen-cyber.com and go to the FAQ section, because they answer questions like, what is GenCyber program? What are the goals of the program? Who attends the programs? How are grants selected? If you're interested in history, they'll talk about how it got started. They'll talk about why the NSA is so interested in this program, and particularly at identifying students before college. And they talk about the need, because you just rarely see programs like this at the undergraduate level, and on and on. It's just a tremendous resource for you. I encourage you also to go to the resources tab as well as the camps tab. It's a fantastic resource, and it's gen-cyber.com. We'll now return to the interview with Dan and Mary LaChance. So let's talk a little bit about your college search, Dan. What were if I remember correctly, I know we met when you were in the 10th grade, and I think you already were interested in cybersecurity then. If I remember, I really do. So
Yeah.
You've been thinking about cybersecurity for a while. And I know you only picked schools even to go on your list that had strong programs. So what were some of the other schools that you considered? And then why don't you tell me why you picked RIT over the other schools that you initially had on your list?
Oh, sure. So the schools that I applied to and I was really thinking about going to were RIT, obviously, then Northeastern, University of Maryland, George Mason, University of Buffalo, and UConn. So some of those schools I chose because they're close, like UConn. Some of them I chose because they have a full bachelor's and master's program in cybersecurity, like RIT and Northeastern, to name two of them. And then other ones just because of the location, like University of Maryland. I chose because it's very close to DC, so it has that going for it. The reason that I chose RIT though is mainly because they have a cybersecurity club there. So there's also the extracurricular activities to go along with my studies. So they have a very strong bachelor's and master's program. So it's an accelerated program, 5 years for both degrees. So I'm currently on that track right now, and I'm supplementing it through the club. And in the club, I'm able to compete in various cybersecurity competitions. I'm able to teach some of the research that I've been doing. I'm able to really gain some connections with a lot of people. And I'm actually going to a conference down in Washington, D.C. in January.
That's great. Anything you want to add to that, Mary, either about the schools? I remember you came in with a fairly tight list. I remember Brown was on there for a while, I think, until the end, and maybe a couple others. What else? Tell me what you want to say about the schools and about the clubs, because I know we've talked about how important these clubs are and the opportunities they lead to.
Yeah. So we did consider, I mean, Dan was near the top of his class in high school. But for us, the most important thing was, what was he going to learn when he was actually at school? Who would he be in contact with? What kind of activities that, like the club, would they have? And then it was quite clear that RIT was far ahead of every other school that we were looking at. They have an entire building dedicated to cybersecurity that the FBI comes and trains at. When you just don't see that at the other ones. Then when we went to the Accepted Students Day, they brought in the students from the club to speak with the potential students. And they went over everything that they would learn within that first year within the club. So it was quite clear that throughout the time at RIT, it's not only the teachers, the program that it had, the accelerated bachelor's, master's, it's that also they were going to accept a whole bunch of AP classes. So he went into RIT with 52 credits. He's in the accelerated bachelor's, master's program, which is you get both degrees in 5 years, but he'll be able to complete it in 4 years with a minor because they accept all of the AP credits, which a lot of the other schools weren't going to accept. Every single checkbox that we had, RIT checked off. And I have to say, I went to RPI and didn't want to like RIT because RPI and RIT are always confused. And back when I went to school, RIT was much more of a regional school. And so I'm like, I don't know, that's not quite as good as RPI. But when we went and we toured both of them, and he got into both RPI and RIT. And I was like, I don't know why you would pick anything other than RIT.
Yeah, and for those of you maybe in the West Coast or some even the Midwest, RPI, Rensselaer Polytech Institute, RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology. So that's a mouthful to say every time. So everybody just goes by. And I feel like giving every listener $5 if they can spell Rensselaer, because
we used to joke you had to learn how to spell it in order to graduate. So
it's the hardest thing in the world to spell, that word. So yeah. So and Mary's husband went to RPI as well. So you're really coming from RPI roots here. And another reason really why I wanted them to come on the podcast is RIT accepts more students than it denies. So if you're one of these people that thinks selectivity is everything, you would miss out on an opportunity like RIT. Let's talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that are emerging for graduates in college, as well as, opportunities while you're in college, as well as what you're seeing for graduates type of descriptions of jobs, compensation. Let's talk about that. And either one of you I'll leave it up to you to decide who wants to talk about it. Or maybe one will start and the other will chime in.
Well, I'll just start by saying at the acceptance.
Mary's smiling.
At the Acceptance Students Day, the salary was something that really helped RIT jump ahead. So I'll let Dan talk all about it.
So I was talking with a executive board member in the cybersecurity club, and he was talking about how he knew a lot of people that had recently graduated that were very involved in the club. And he said that he couldn't think of a single person that was making less than $130,000 right out of college.
Right out of college.
Right out of college. And that's bachelor's people, that's bachelor's and master's people, that's minors, everything. Nothing less than $130,000.
That's not the high. Like sometimes you'll have this one-off high. It's not even the
you
median.
Want to know a one-off high?
Oh,
sure.
I can talk about the high. So there's one student. He graduated in 4.5 years. He actually just graduated a few days ago, and he had a bachelor's, master's in cybersecurity, and a math minor, and he had a job lined up straight out of college from one of the co-ops that he worked there with one of the co-ops, and then he was asked to come back, and his starting salary was $275,000.
$275,000 out of college.
Out of college, he is
okay. That's top 22. That's top 6% in the country of family income. And by the way, RIT's acceptance rate is about 71%. And so I talk to a lot of people who think a school can't be good if it takes 7 out of 10 kids. And I think 275,000 at 22 or 23 sounds pretty good to me.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the government grant programs that are available for cybersecurity right now? There's some real unique opportunities. Mary, you can talk to this.
Yeah. So when we were looking up going into cybersecurity, there are a few programs, one through the Department of Defense, one through, do you remember the other one? The Cyber Corps Scholarship for Service. Those are the two big ones. Think of it almost like ROTC, but for cybersecurity work. And you're not working for the military when you come out, you're going to work for the government. So these two scholarship programs cover anywhere from tuition to tuition plus stipends. And every year that you take the scholarship, you have to work for the government for that year. So like if you took it for 3 years, then you have to work for the government for 3 years after you come out. But you're getting paid too. So they pay for some of your college education, and then you have a guaranteed job when you come out with the government as well.
Wow, that's pretty good. And obviously, RIT is a big co-op school. You want to talk about sort of how co-op works at RIT and what kind of opportunities, you see being available for current students?
So it changes depending on your major. So I can't talk too much about a lot of the other majors, but for cybersecurity, there are 2 required co-ops, and they can be as long as like a whole semester or as short as just 10 weeks over the summer. Most people do 2 summer co-ops just because it works better with the academic year. And basically, you're responsible for finding a company that's willing to take you on as a full-time employee for those 10 weeks. And the pay is actually pretty well. So people typically, their first year are making above $25 an hour, something like that. And then their second co-op, you hear people making like $80 an hour, $50 to $80 an hour, because you've built up a lot of those skills and you already have work experience. If you did well in your first co-op, that will lead you to get a better job the next co-op. And from that second co-op, a lot of people actually get asked to come back as a full-time employee once they graduate with their degree.
Friends, this concludes the first of 2 parts of my interview with Dan and Mary LaChance as they're discussing careers and opportunities in cybersecurity. I hope you join us next week for the final part.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Good morning, Lisa. Or I guess it's afternoon now.
Yeah, I'm like, when am I? I'm totally thrown off. Like, I thought it was 5:00. What?
I know. Well, I guess maybe I'm on Hawaii time.
Oh,
So that's kind of where I'm thinking. I know. Sorry about that. I really did start work this morning, but it is, in fact, 5-ish East Coast time, 4-ish here in the beautiful Midwest where we're going.
Right.
Because today we're going to talk about Illinois Institute of Technology, IIT for short. So, Lisa,
it's always morning there.
Good to know. So this is your neck of the woods. I mean, you spent some time in Chicago, so you probably know something about this school.
I mean, so there are some family connections to the school. So my husband's dad was a professor at IIT for a few years, and he was he was a metallurgist. He had his PhD from MIT, so he went there. And my husband was actually born and spent his first few years running around that campus. So, I mean, he has very fond memories of it. Apparently, they had some ducks. That's what he remembers the most. He doesn't really remember the science. He remembers the ducks. And then his dad went into an industry job and they left. But so that is one thing. And then, I actually, when I applied to graduate school, the two schools that I got into were Northwestern and IIT. So I went to visit IIT and, I just realized they were going to want me to do like statistics a lot there. And I figured that would probably be disappointing for us all. So I did not go there, but that would have been, the place I could have gotten my degree.
You're saying Northwestern was going to be easier than IIT.
See, so, I mean, I don't want to get you too off the subject, but the program that I did, my clinical psychology program, was through the hospital at Northwestern. So it was very, very, very clinically focused, where there was another one and the Evanston campus that is very, very research focused. And I was not, definitely not a good fit for that. And IIT was more similar to the research focused one. So they would have just hated me and I would have gotten fired out of that program. So
I don't know that that is true, but it's true that IIT is rigorous and they are going to make you work. I'm glad to hear your husband has fond memories of that campus because I liked it. Well, let me start with some of the basics, a little bit of the history that predates your father-in-law's experience there. So the school started way back in 1890 when a Chicago minister, Frank Gunsaulus. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong.
It's not. It's how do you spell that?
Gunsaulus.
That sounds perfect. I was like, was it Gonzalez? But no, probably wasn't because he was French. Okay.
Yeah. So it's I mean, like maybe I don't know. I'm sorry, IIT. But he wanted to build a school for students of all backgrounds, and he wanted to do it for $1 million. He wanted students to learn by doing. And Philip Danforth Armour, who is one of those famous Chicago meat packers and hog butcherers way back in the day, he donated the $1 million and it became the Armour Institute of Technology, which merged in 1940 with the Lewis Institute, and hence IIT was born. So it's always had a history of experiential learning. So one of the things about the school that I kind of knew, but I didn't really get until I got onto campus and I visited back in late September. The Chicago campus is called the Mies campus, and they have a couple other campuses, Rice campus and Wheaton, and the Moffett campus in Bedford Park, which are smaller campuses. The Mies campus in Chicago is really where it's at. And Mies is MIES, and they call it that because it was designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, the architect, and he actually directed the architecture school for 20 years. And when I first got to campus, of course, I was running a little bit late, and I went into the administrative building, and I just kind of got a vibe. I was like, wow, I really like this space, because it felt very clean, very mid-century modern, and
Yeah.
I really didn't get it until went on the tour, and our tour guide was an architecture student, and she like clued us in. So the entire campus is considered one of the 200 most important works of architecture, and that is not just Linda Depker saying that, but the American Institute of
Because I know you
Architects.
got a list. You got a list. Things go on, things go off. It's
Yeah,
very highly
well,
maintained.
yeah. I wish I did have a list, but maybe I should put together one. Um, anyway, so and there is Crown Hall, which was designed again by Mies van der Rohe, which is a National Historic Landmark. And this is a really cool looking building. There are no internal support beams. It's home to the College of Architecture, floor to ceiling windows. It really is just stunning. And I know this type of architecture isn't for everyone. But it makes the campus look beautiful, and they have beautiful views in their library. I took all kinds of pictures because you can see straight downtown to the Willis Tower. It is lovely. The other building on campus that's really of note, I shouldn't say the other, another building on campus is the McCormick Campus Center, which is much newer and was designed via an international competition. And in this building, they actually have an Exelon tube, which the green line goes through. So you can't actually see the train, but when you're in this building, there's like a, I don't know, 500-foot long metal tube. And the train is literally going through that. And you would think it would be really loud, but this building also houses the student run radio station, WIIT. So it can't be that disturbing if they've got their radio station housed there as well. So just amazing looking buildings on campus. The other thing is it's 120 acres. It is a nationally accredited arboretum with about 2,000 plus trees on campus, and they are pursuing a level 2 status, which requires 100 plus tree species on campus. So I'm not surprised that your husband remembers ducks. And when I was there, it was in the middle of the afternoon, and I'm walking around campus, and all of a sudden I realized I am hearing cicadas. Like I took a recording, and if I knew how to edit it in, I would, because you could hear cicadas like you were out in the woods,
Oh,
at
wow.
dusk or something. So there's definitely wildlife on this campus, even if it is just bugs, which is surprising because it's right in the Bronzeville neighborhood. And it's just one train stop away from Chinatown. So you really are right in not the heart of Chicago, but you're pretty darn close.
Mhm.
A little bit more about the school. They are experiencing tremendous growth. They have had 35% growth in undergrad applications in the past few years, along with 37% growth in grad school apps. There's about 3,100 students undergrad with a total of 6,900 students. So it's a little bit smaller for a school, but I think I like that size. It's an R2 institute, which means high research activity, not the highest. And they've got several research institutes, including one on food safety and health, tech entrepreneurship, biomedical science, and sustainable energy. And I want to mention their mission statement because I think it sums up the college perfectly. Their mission statement is to provide distinctive and relevant education in an environment of scientific, technological, and professional knowledge, creation, and innovation. So you hear it right there, that technology, science is just, it goes through everything with that school. So let's talk about academics. They do have a core curriculum. Um, it is not like, the Columbia or the U Chicago core curriculum, but they do have requirements for writing, humanities, science. They require a STEM module and a collaborative, interdisciplinary and or professional experience. Their undergrad colleges include the Armour College of Engineering, College of Architecture, College of Computing, the Lewis College of Science and Letters, and the Stewart School of Business. The College of Computing, one thing that they are working on is really to infuse data science into all disciplines. And their fastest growing programs are data science, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity, all housed in that school. They have two grad schools, the Chicago College of Law and the Institute of Design. Average class size is 22. Student to faculty ratio is 12-1. And the professors there actually do the teaching. So they do have TAs, but primarily for labs and for help, not for actually teaching. Academic resources. They have a resource center where you can get peer tutoring. They do offer supplemental instruction for those traditionally difficult classes, academic coaching, workshops, computer lab. They've got like I said earlier, a beautiful library that is open 24 hours a day when needed. So as you get closer to finals, it will be there. An Office of Global Services for international students. Academic advising starts the summer before you arrive on campus. And they have a pretty strong career advising center where they help with internships. And there are a lot of very strong relationships in Chicagoland, especially for tech and architecture students. 91% of their grads are employed or are continuing onto grad school within 6 months of graduation. They also have a program called the Elevate program, which guarantees students experiential learning, and that can be in the form of internships, research, or study abroad, and also can include pre-college opportunities for high school students, and then that can mean through virtual internships, and that can turn into scholarships if they decide to matriculate to IIT. One of the things that I was surprised about was if you live within 20 miles of the campus, you can commute. Otherwise, they require first and second years to live on campus. But they have something called the Hawk House. They have a commuter lounge. So just for commuting students where they have, study areas, video game consoles, pool table, ping pong, shared kitchen. But the Hawk House has overnight rooms. So say you're staying on campus and, lost track of time at the library and don't want to, go back home, you can actually stay on campus. They've got all of the amenities. So if you forgot your toothbrush, they've got you covered, and it's only $20 a night, which I think is just a wonderful service.
Yeah, that might be the
commuters.
best priced hotel room in Chicago.
I asked, I was like, hey, can anybody book that? And nope, it's only for students. I know, kind of a bummer, but yes. So majors. The school's got about 50 plus majors. Their engineering and computer science programs are the most popular, but they've got some really interesting ones. And one of the things that they're really known for, as you can imagine, is architecture. And they do have a B-Arch program. They also have Masters of Architecture, Master of Landscape Architecture, a Master of High Performance Buildings, a Master's of Tall Buildings and Vertical Urbanism, along with a PhD. And again, their architecture program has got really terrific internship programs. That BArch program is a 5-year program, and no portfolio is required for
Oh,
first-year
wow.
applicants. Yeah, it's so if you decide as, a junior or senior in high school that you really want to study architecture, this should definitely be on your list. Now, that is not true for transfer students. You would need a portfolio, but not for applying as a freshman. Some of the other interesting majors, architectural engineering, artificial intelligence, bioanalytical chemistry. They have business, but they also have business and engineering, business and psychology, and business and IT. Same thing with computer science. So they have computer science. You can also do a 5-year program where you come out with your BS and Comp Sci, along with a master's in intellectual property management and markets. So with the rise of AI and all of that, I just see that as getting more and more
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
They have digital humanities, they have economics, plus they have economics and business analytics, economics and cybersecurity, economics and data science, and economics and policy, food science and nutrition, forensic chemistry. So those of you who like CSI, game design and experimental media, and medicinal chemistry. So if you are interested in, say, coming up with the latest Ozempic kind of drug, that would be the major for you.
Oh, big pharma, here we come.
I know, right? Student life. So it's a technical school, so this probably won't come as a surprise. The gender balance is a little skewed. It's about 68% male, 32% female. Diversity, 16% Asian, 5% Black, 20% Hispanic or Latino, 34% white, 4% biracial, and they've got about 19% international students.
Yeah, that almost seems like lower than what my impression was. It seemed like that was where so many international students studied, but it's all like what you see, right? You're not seeing all the other students. So
Yeah, and that is, yeah, I'm not sure that that includes grad students. So it could be grad level, what might be higher. Um, Greek life is not a big thing here. Only about 7% of men join Greek life and 3% of women. Like I mentioned earlier, first and second years are required to live on campus unless you're within that 20-mile radius. They have traditional dorms and apartment style. And took a look at a sample dorm room, and really nice. I think they're nice. You've got great views. Um, should be happy with that. Facilities on campus. They've got the Bog, which is an underground student hangout. And I don't mean underground like, hard to find, but like literally underground. And they've got bowling alley there, arcade games. They bring in comedy, I guess, comedians. They've got food there. They also have the Ed Kaplan Family Institute for Innovation and Tech Entrepreneurship. And this is where the Institute of Design is housed, and where the IPRO program is. And that's the Interprofessional Projects Program, which is interdisciplinary, and students have the opportunity to work with other students from different areas to solve real world problems and create projects. It's where the Idea Shop is, where they have their makerspace, 3D printers and scanners, CNC machines, laser cutters, and that's open to students to work on school projects and also on personal projects. And staff is there to help teach you how to use those tools, and they can advise you on your projects and like product viability, that kind of thing. Dining is, no one seemed super excited about the dining options on campus.
bad. Oh,
Yeah.
kids,
Um,
hungry.
But I tell you what everyone was excited about were all the opportunities just off campus.
Well, Chinatown, I mean, I've had some of the best meals of my life there.
Yes. So Chinatown is just one train stop away, and terrific food. I hear about it all the time. See the charges on my credit card coming from Chinatown. Sports. IIT does have them. They are the Scarlet Hawks. I know, kind of a surprise maybe. They are a D3 school in the Northern Athletics Collegiate Conference, and they have things like soccer and volleyball, men's and women's cross country, basketball, swimming, diving, lacrosse, track, and tennis. No football here. So it is not going to give you that rah-rah spirit if you're looking for that. Any questions, Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that the majors are strong in the sciences and technology, but they're also innovative in the science and technology. And that's one of the things that kind of keeps them apart from some other schools. Is that correct?
You know, it struck me that they are paying attention to what's going on and keeping everything up to date for students. So they are leading the charge on things. Some of those majors, it's just like you don't see them everywhere. And when they talk about combining those majors, that's, I love that you can do economics and cybersecurity. I mean, when you hear about cybersecurity breaches, I mean, how does that affect businesses or communities and things like that? I think it's really innovative programming that they're putting together. So I like that.
Friends, this concludes the first part of Lisa and Linda discussing IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology, or just better known as Illinois Tech. Hope you join us next week for part 2. On Monday's episode, I want to continue into this conversation of how to know if a school is financially healthy at an institution, particularly for people that don't want to just rely on the financial Forbes grades or Heckinger's similar report for schools. But you want to look at fresh, direct information from the schools. So I'll be discussing where to go on the 990 to get the financial information that you need. And then Linda's excellent interview with Soup Campbell will be in its final part. Friends, remember, hard work beats talent when talent refuses to work hard. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.